welcome this last one. We go back a long way, and you're all really precious to me. You're part of my coming of age as a political activist and a person of faith. We've been on a long journey together, and I'm very glad to share a song with you today. This is a song that we've sung together many times. You probably know that I wrote it for a festival of friendship between the US and Iran that was put together by myself and some other Iranians and people of faith on, I think, the 7th anniversary of 9/11. And the story being that many countries around the world were so exuding compassion and care for us and lighting candles in their windows, and we knew that. But we didn't know that countries that were considered enemies also were doing that, and one was Iran. So in our festival of friendship, I wrote this song for that. And on that day, 7 years later, we all lit candles in our windows for Iran because there was a lot of saber rattling going on, as there still is. So I've updated the song a little bit to fit this particular occasion and the theme of forgotten countries, Iran being one we will not forget. So please sing on the chorus with me. Things like that. There were candles in the windows all around the world. There were candles all around the world. When the planes burst into flames and the towers crumbled down, friend and enemy alike, like a traveler in the ground. The shock it rippled around the world, the sorrow and the fright. People we called enemies lit candles in the night. A mother in Morocco, a teacher in Tehran, a soldier in El Salvador, a child in Pakistan, lit candles in their windows for strangers far away. Without our common sorrow, we were family that day. There were candles in the windows all around the world. Candles, there were candles all around the world. Today it's many years gone by. How little now remains of the goodwill that surrounded us in the midst of all that pain, all the wars that we have started, the lives that have been lost, the trust that has been broken. How can we count the cost? Oh, but don't you still remember that day when we were one? The day we were the wounded, not the heroes in the sun. The day our nation trembled and the world drew close and one, with candles in the windows like a beacon in the storm. all around the world. Candles, candles, all around the world. So as we come together, we vow not to forget the peoples we belong to, the countries we call friends. We vow with all our hearts to be the peace we want to see, loving across the borders till every land is free. Let's light candles, candles in our windows, all around the world. Let's light candles, candles, all around the world. 'Cause there were candles, candles in the windows, all around the world. Candles, there were candles all around the world.
Beautiful. Before I introduce our next speaker, let me announce that if you have questions for any of the speakers, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll be gathering those up at the end and compiling those. So, so our next speaker, I'm happy to introduce the Reverend Dr. Naeem Atiq. Father Naeem is a retired Episcopal priest and canon of St. George's Anglican Episcopal Cathedral in Jerusalem. He was the pastor of several churches in Galilee and Jerusalem. He was a co-founder and director of Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem. Father Naeem was the first to articulate a Palestinian theology of liberation in his 1989 book, Justice and Only Justice, A Palestinian Theology of Liberation. He authored and co-edited a number of other books in both English and Arabic. Welcome, welcome, Father Naeem.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. I am especially thankful for the invitation to be with you in this EPI meeting. I would like to begin by giving thanks to the organizers. And it's really a privilege to be with friends from Latin America and from other places around the world. I would like to begin my presentation about Palestine by using a card of 4 maps. Many of you might be familiar with that, but I thought because I'm speaking to friends from Latin America, they might not be as familiar with the background of the situation in Palestine. And so bear with me. It will be my introduction, and I hope you will be able to follow the presentation by looking at the maps that will be placed on the screen at this time. Daniel, if you can, please place the 4 maps. Yes, thank you very much. Please look at the, I want to begin with the first map on your left. The first slide on the left shows the area of Palestine before 1947, before 1940 in the late 40s. The green area represents the people and the land. At the beginning of the 20th century, the inhabitants of Palestine were comprised of Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians, and Palestinian Jews. They were all Palestinians, but belonged to different religions. The white spots that you notice on the map represent Jewish ownership of the land at the time. Jews owned less than 6% of the land. Palestine belonged to its indigenous people, the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews, the indigenous people of the land. But it was occupied by the Turkish Ottoman Empire for 400 years. So let's look at map number 2. After World War I, Palestine came under colonial British rule. By then, Zionism, a Western Jewish nationalist movement, had started in Europe, and some Zionists were coming into Palestine legally and illegally. Before the end of the World War, the British government promised the Zionist leadership to make a home for Jews in Palestine. This is known as the Balfour Declaration. The people of the land, the Palestinians, were not consulted. Britain did not own Palestine to give it to somebody else. The British acted in the spirit of colonialism and imperialism. Due to the increasing tensions and conflicts between the incoming Western Zionists and the indigenous Palestinian population who were resisting the occupation of their country, the United Nations decided to divide the country into 2 states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. To the Zionist minority, mainly Western Jews, the United Nations gave approximately 47% of the land gratis. And to the majority population, the indigenous people of the land, the Palestinians, the United Nations gave them 43%. Palestinians rejected the plan immediately, and they said it's unjust. The Zionists accepted it. It was their first legal basis for setting up a state. Please remember, not all the indigenous Palestinian Jews in Palestine supported Zionism. It was largely the Western Zionist leadership that were in control. After the Zionists accepted the partition plan, they started to drive the Palestinians from the areas given to them by the United Nations. But they did not stop at their 47%, they went beyond it. By the end of the war, 750,000 Palestinians were driven out by the Zionists at gunpoint. Some of them fled in fear, but most of them were driven out by force. The United Nations asked for the return of the refugees, but the Zionists refused to do that. Here, as you look at map number 2, my story of my family comes in. I was a boy in 1948, and we were living in a small town close to the Jordan River, down south of the Sea of Galilee. And my father was a business person. He was a goldsmith, silversmith, and he had a good business. And he had bought a piece of land. He built 3 houses on it. I have fond memories of my life in Bisan. But when the Zionists occupied our town, a few days later, they ordered us all to get out. So at gunpoint, we were taken out of Bisan. They took all the Muslims to the east of Bisan, the Jordan River, and sent them to the country of Jordan. And they took all of us Christians, put us on the buses, and they drove us and literally dumped us on the outskirts of the town of Nazareth. And we lost everything. We became refugees. We were never allowed to go back to our homes, and our homes became the homes for Jewish immigrants coming from outside. So let's look now at map number 3. Instead of 47%, the Zionists conquered 78% of the land. So you could see the white now becoming bigger than the green. The green represents the Palestinians. The white represents the Zionist, the Zionist Jews there. And instead of the 43% that the United Nations gave to the Palestinians, only 22% were left. So if we look at map number 3, you can see the green now. You see the bigger green part is the West Bank, and the smaller green part on the left is the Gaza Strip. And that's all that was left. It was 22%, and the Zionists had taken 78% of the land of Palestine and drove out the Palestinians from the rest of the country. So that's the tragedy. Then in 1967, again looking at map number 3, Israel occupied the West Bank, that is occupied all the green areas of map number 3, and it started then confiscating the Palestinian land and building settlements. And so when you look at map number 4, you see the beginning of the settlement building. All the settlements built on confiscated Palestinian land by the Zionist Israeli government. And now over 50 years have gone by, and the Palestinians living on the West Bank under the occupation of Israel, many of them have been pushed out. Israel denies them their human and political rights. They have been stripped many have been stripped from their residency rights. They were discriminated against by Israeli government. Many homes have been demolished. Their trees, olive trees, have been uprooted They have been humiliated, assaulted, harassed on a daily basis, all in violation of United Nations resolutions. But no one, unfortunately, no one has been able to stop the injustices of Israel. Now, what did America do in the meantime? Before even President Trump came into power, the United States always talked about being an honest broker, but that was not the reality. They were never honest in dealing with the injustice. Although the United States supported the two-state solution, it has been unwilling to make Israel end its illegal occupation or stop the illegal confiscation of Palestinian land. Please, Daniel, if you can put the final map of the Palestinian, the settlements on confiscated Palestinian land so that people can see it. It'll be good if we can keep this map, but it'll be nice if we can show the people how the West Bank is riddled with settlements, all illegal under international law. But the United States has done even more things. It always, in the UN Security Council, it always put the veto power in order to protect Israel from being sanctioned by the international community. So the United States has always been complicit, always supporting Israeli injustice. And why? Well, there are many reasons, but I will mention a few. There is a very strong pro-Israel lobby in the United States. And even more than the lobby, there are millions of Christian Zionists in the United States. They are right-wing evangelical fundamentalist Christians who have been the backbone of Trump's supporters, including people like Vice President Mike Pence, who is a Christian Zionist, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's also a Christian Zionist. And they're blindly supportive of Israel, and they have not really been able to do justice to the Palestinians. But what did President Trump do after he became president? You know, I believe President Trump could have resolved the conflict by standing up and asking Israel to implement international law. He had the clout, he could have done it, and probably it could have earned him a Nobel Peace Prize. But he did not do that because he sided with Israel and gave Israel what it wanted in Palestine, and ignored totally the historic rights of the Palestinians and the demands of international law. President Trump satisfied Israel's greed and lust for Palestinian land. He let them continue in their domination of the Palestinian people. He legitimated the illegal settlements which Israel built on confiscated Palestinian land and allowed it to annex more Palestinian land and expand its settlement building. But worse than all of this, he recognized Jerusalem in its entirety as the capital of Israel, thus violating UN resolutions and international law. Trump gave a blind eye to the crimes perpetrated by the extremist Jewish settlers and the Israeli army against the Palestinian civilian population. So I want to just take a few more minutes and tell you what the Palestinians are looking for. What constitutes a just peace for the Palestinians? The first is to end the occupation, the illegal occupation of Israel, to the number 3 map here, map number 3. That is, we're only asking, the Palestinians are only asking for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem as its capital. So the Palestinians are not asking to go back to the 43% or even to the first map where all of Palestine was inhabited by the Palestinians. They only want to have their own sovereign state alongside the state of Israel. They want Jerusalem to be shared, West Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, East Jerusalem to be the capital of Palestine, but Jerusalem must continue to be an open city for all the people, because now most of the Palestinians on the West Bank or Gaza Strip cannot even go to Jerusalem because Israel will not allow them. So open city for Jerusalem. This is all that we are really talking about. Some more things. We would like to see the release of the political prisoners. Most of these political prisoners are on administrative detention by Israel, and they have been there for years. They've never been accused of anything, but they are in Israeli jails. One of them, every now and then, they go on hunger strike because their situation is very, very difficult, but they continue to stay in prison. And we want the resolution of the refugee problems. The refugees have been there for 70 years now, and we need to have a resolution of the refugee issue in accordance with UN resolutions and international law. And I believe that Israel needs to be accountable, held accountable for its injustice, oppression of the Palestinian people. So I want to stop here. Let me just add something here. Recently, after the American election, I found out that both Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, and Joe Biden, the president-elect, have been talking, and this was in the news. So I have the news of that. They were saying that they believe in the worth and value of every Palestinian and every Israeli, and will work to ensure that Palestinians and Israelis enjoy equal measures of freedom, security, prosperity, and democracy. They said that we are committed to a two-state solution, which is exactly what the Palestinians want, and they will oppose unilateral steps that undermine that goal, which is what President Trump has done. President Trump with Israel, they did a unilateral, they took a unilateral decision, which was unjust. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden said also that they will oppose annexation and settlement expansions. They will take steps to restore economic and humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, address the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, reopen the US consulate in East Jerusalem, and work to reopen the PLO mission in Washington, DC. So this is what we wanted. So we want to live in peace with Israel. Israel can live securely. We can live securely. We are neighbors, and we have to do it, but Israel needs to implement UN resolutions and international law. This is, we believe, will constitute a just peace for the Palestinians, and as they live in peace and security alongside the state of Israel. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.